Lawyers of Reddit, what is the most ridiculous thing you have seen in court? Story 1. Attorney shoves photos in judge's face. Bailiff draws weapon. Years ago, I was in a jury trial in a wrongful death case, with the death occurring next to a rural city park. We challenged plaintiff's planned use of photos, showing other parks in the city that were fenced. We went back and forth on it with the judge, and ultimately he decided the conditions were not sufficiently similar and excluded the photos. He made clear that it was his final decision. I was standing at counsel table waiting for the bailiff to summon jurors, when suddenly I heard plaintiff's attorney yelling about the photos. He had grabbed them from counsel table and ran up to the very edge of the bench and was pushing them in the judge's face, yelling, "You're telling me you're not going to let the jury see these photographs?" The judge looked shocked, and then it caught the bailiff's attention, and he unholstered his firearm. I seriously thought I was going to see opposing counsel shot dead in the middle of trial. Story 2. District Attorney confuses taquitos for tequila in driving under the influence case closing. Once, a colleague had a no-drive driving under the influence case. Client testified that they went into a gas station to buy taquitos. The district attorney in closing then kept repeating how no one should believe the defendant's story because they clearly admitted to buying tequila. Everyone kept looking at each other like, is this a joke? After a few mentions of this, the judge finally was like, they said taquitos, not tequila. Still not entirely convinced, the district attorney knew what taquitos were. Story 3. Attorney leaves court repeatedly for substances during trial. A defense attorney getting up and leaving the courtroom every 20 minutes of a 4-day trial for 20 minutes at a time to go to the bathroom, in other words, to go do substances. Then coming back and clearly being on substances. My guess was a certain substance. Also getting up and wandering around the courtroom at random during the trial, being creepy and weirdly looming over everyone, being disoriented and aggressive. The judge repeatedly told him to sit down and eventually threw him out just for acting so very weird and being disruptive and disrespectful of decorum. He was later disbarred and investigated for being intoxicated and on substances multiple times in court, and for multiple sexual harassment charges against staff. Dude was a piece of work, but he acted like this for years before he was finally investigated and stripped. Story 4. Defendant insists Jesus healed broken foot, contradicted by video of salsa dancing. Me: ma'am, you're saying you broke your foot 2 weeks ago? Her: that's true, yes, I did. Me: but you don't have any medical records to verify this? Her: no, I didn't see a doctor. Me: and you walked in here today without any trouble? Her: that's right, and I'll tell you how. Me: how? Her: Jesus healed me. Me: nothing further. Judge: counsel, anything else you want to add? Me: if it please the court, Your Honor, and if you think it would be helpful, I do have a video recording with me from the day in question. My client can authenticate it if we put him under oath. It's from his security camera, about 2 hours after the complainant says she broke her foot. Judge: and what would the video show if we watched it? Me: the complainant, salsa dancing. Judge blinks: I don't think that will be necessary. Story 5. Attorney wears long tie to cover broken zipper. I occasionally served as a guardian ad litem in a small rural town. One of the court-appointed attorneys who regularly appeared in the family court, an overly jovial middle-aged male, often pushed the envelope with his attire. He regularly appeared donning cartoon character ties, leather jackets, and/or what appeared to be black denim pants. One day the attorney showed up to court with no jacket and a very long tie, extending at least 6 inches down past the crotch of his pants. When the presiding judge asked the attorney, "What's going on with your tie?" the attorney stood up, pulled the tie aside, revealing a fully open zipper, and exclaimed, "I always have to wear my tie like this when I wear these pants, since the zipper is broken." The judge was not amused but dropped the issue without action against the attorney. The attorney was disbarred years later for reasons unrelated to his attire. Story 6. Attorney jogs in sports bra during Zoom court. On Zoom, the attorney was jogging in the woods in a sports bra. She kept the camera angled down on her chest. We couldn't see her face, but we saw her bouncing chest as she jogged. Drinking at 9 a.m. We call this guy Beer O'Clock. I was a clerk at the time, and he showed up to his motion hearing via Zoom at 9 a.m., cracked a cold one, and chugged it on camera. I have so many more where that came from. Zoom court is a whole adventure. Story 7. Defendant claims alien origins during motion hearing. Rural West Virginia in the mid-2000s. I was in the hallway waiting for the courtroom to be opened. I had the 1:30 and another hearing was at 1 o'clock. I hear this lawyer telling her client, "Under no circumstances may you talk to the judge, that's her job." They get in there. The judge is denying their motion for a continuance or something pretty perfunctory. The court then asks the other side if they have anything else. "No, Your Honor." The defense, "No, Your Honor." Then the guy stands up. "Judge, I have something I need to say. When I first came to this planet 24,000 years ago, I knew it would be my home, as it resembled my former sphere of residence, Regulon 5. But when I exited my dreadnought, wild hogs ate my head off, transforming me into the raw energy source you see before you today. Ever since that moment, I have been here, living among you, sharing my wisdom and biding my time, incapable of leaving, waiting for the very moment when..." At this point, half of us in the gallery are laughing, and I stop paying attention to his rant. His lawyer's head is in her hands, and the judge is getting upset. The judge starts yelling at his bailiff, who is laughing. The guy's lawyer tries to interrupt the rant and say, "We are done, thank you, judge," and leave, but the judge is just mad at everyone. I'm biting my lip to not laugh. Then I refocus on what the guy is saying. ... And that is why you will all must perish so that we all can have everlasting life. You will accompany me to the next world, not through space, but through the entryway created by my physical form. The bailiff tried to cuff him, and the dude tried to bite him and got pepper sprayed by the other bailiff. And that was the most interesting motion for a continuance I ever saw. Story 8. Prosecutor reenacts harm victim's death throes in court. A prosecutor, not my case, reenacted the death throes of the victim in a homicide case. He got down on the floor and flopped around, screaming and moaning before spasming into silence. I think the defense attorney was too shocked to object. Edit. In retrospect, I'm glad it wasn't a sexual assault and homicide trial. Story 9. Attorney uses Walmart bag as briefcase, faces judge's wrath. I've posted this before. The secondary cringe exposure was painful. Years ago, I was sitting in federal district court, waiting my turn for a criminal hearing. A lawyer with a reputation for not being perfectly prepared and a little untidy came in about a minute late for a change of plea hearing. This is already categorically insanely suicidal behavior in our district, especially before the judge who had been sitting longer than I have been alive. For background, our district is so formal and serious, you can hear a pin drop at all times in our courtrooms. The blue coats/court security officers have radios that they communicate with throughout the courthouse, so the judges usually know if an attorney is in the building, but not present for a hearing. The judge is on the bench, calm like a pool of deep water. He just watches the attorney hustle in through the double doors, past the bar, and take a seat next to his client. I'm watching this unfold, and I'm shocked, because the attorney is using a Walmart plastic gray shopping bag as a briefcase. And Itescu was going loud, so much rustling as the attorney pulls papers out of the bag and spreads them over the table, he gets settled in. The judge says, "Mr. Cringe, I see that you're here for the change of plea hearing. Are you prepared to proceed?" A. Yes, Judge. Changes of plea in our district usually have two documents. the plea agreement, and the factual basis, sometimes called a statement of offense in other districts. Our plea agreements are formal filings, with no introductory letters like in other districts. At the outset of the hearing, our judges always inquire if defense counsel has reviewed with the defendant 1. The government's evidence, 2. The plea agreement, and 3. The factual basis. I know that Rule 11 requires this, but our judges typically tackle these 3 items within the first 30 seconds of the hearing. Mr. Cringe, in response to the factual basis inquiry, says, "No, Judge, I haven't had time to review the factual basis with the defendant yet." This is like dropping an atom bomb on the court. We have weeks to take care of this, and the factual basis is typically something like a 3-page document that takes 10 minutes to review. It's gross negligence to not be prepared in this way. The judge goes beet red, just deep crimson. In a surprisingly calm voice, he says, "I understand that you have not yet reviewed the factual basis with the defendant?" Mr. Cringe is like, "Yes, Judge." "Judge, we will all sit and wait while you review the factual basis with your client. Please let me know when you've finished." So in a dead quiet courtroom, counsel sits down and looks at his desk. He grabs the empty shopping bag and looks inside it. He's completely shaken, because how on earth are you going to look inside an empty shopping bag that is 100% collapsible? It is. The whole app and desk quiet torabue. Loud. This goes on for what must have been 30 seconds, but felt like 30 years. Mr. Cringe stands up and says, "Judge, I can't find a copy of the factual basis." The judge says, "Okay, I see that. Here, you can have mine. Please be mindful that I've underlined portions of it, and I would like it back." Mr. Cringe asks if he can approach and takes the judge's copy of the factual basis. Everyone in the courtroom is in physical pain at this point. The judge seems unfazed, other than being as red as salsa roja. We sit there for 10 full, long minutes while Mr. Cringe reviews the factual basis with his client. The client is flipping out because he's just watched his lawyer destroy any faith that he had built up during representation. Mr. Cringe stands up and says he's finished. Judge gets back the factual basis, squares up the pages, and says, "Thank you, Mr. Cringe." They finish the change of plea hearing, and the United States Marshals take the defendant back into custody. The judge hasn't dismissed Mr. Cringe or the Assistant United States Attorney handling the case, so they are just standing there at counsel tables. The judge addresses Mr. Cringe. "Mr. Cringe, I couldn't help but notice that you were not prepared today. That is unacceptable. By tomorrow morning, you will file a brief with this court outlining." Story 10. Lawyer requests showing non-incriminating videos to counter crime selfies. I'm not a lawyer, but I know a court interpreter who was relaying a story from a case the other day where 3 selfie videos of the defendant perpetrating the crime he was accused of were shown in court. Without any hint of irony or joking, the defense lawyer told the judge that the Crown was unfairly quote 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 quote. There were also hundreds of other ones on his phone where he didn't appear to be doing something illegal, and that's only fair. Apparently, this resulted in some audible laughs from inside the courtroom, and just a confused look from the lawyer not understanding what was so funny about the request. Judge shot it down and said it would be a colossal waste of the court's time. Location: Canada. Story 11. Defendant demonstrates patting head and rubbing tummy in court. I was being sued by an insurance company from rear-ending a car that pulled out of a parking lot and into both lanes, same direction, in a construction zone that was essentially a cattle chute, concrete barriers on both sides, leaving no shoulder. I'm on the witness stand, and their lawyer asked what happened, and I told him they pulled out directly in front of me as I was traveling about 40 miles per hour, and they straddled both lanes, leaving me nowhere to go, so I hit the horn and brakes. So he asked me, "So you are saying when my client pulled out in front of you, you had time to use your horn and use the brakes, but couldn't stop? Did it ever occur to you to simply apply the brakes and not waste time using the horn? Don't you think you would have avoided hitting my client if you did that?" I couldn't believe the question. I answered, Well, since you've admitted your client pulled out in front of me, I can admit to something too. I can hit the brake and horn at the same time, just like I can pat my head and rub my tummy at the same time. See? And proceeded to demonstrate. I was found 0% liable. Story 12. Defense attorney throws client under the bus during request for new counsel. I watched a lawyer throw his client under the bus when the client was requesting a new attorney and answering questions from the judge. The lawyer kept interrupting to deflect all blame back to the client, who was locked up in jail. Client's argument was lawyer never answered the phone. Where I'm at, lawyers can't call the jail, they can visit in person. Don't video visit because they're recorded. Lawyer also refused to meet with him except while in court, refused to follow up with potential witnesses, and check on evidence that could help defense. Lawyer's argument was, he's not going to answer the phone with nothing to update, he wasn't contacting witnesses, because client lied, and lawyer was done chasing nonsense. I almost died. The judge was baffled. She ended the hearing quickly, granting his motion, and off-record berated the attorney, saying she'd be reporting his misconduct in her court. I'm appalled that lawyer works for the public defender's office, and people are getting inadequate representation when he is their lawyer. Location USA. Story 13. Public defender admits client's guilt while requesting bond in predator case. Not a lawyer, but a cop. We ran a sting operation, caught a dude. Goes to the bond hearing, the public defender gets up to the stand and said, "My client is guilty and going to probably plead guilty, but can he please get a bond?" Me and my lieutenant looked at each other, jaw dropped and stunned. He did not get a bond, and another person caught in the op, who got called for his bond hearing with the same lawyer, told his lawyer he didn't want a bond hearing anymore. Story 14. Defense rests immediately to manipulate jury sentencing outcome. I thought it was pretty strange at the time, but later found out what the strategy was. What the defendant's attorney said when it was time to present their case was, "The defense rests." That was it. No attempt at all to rebut the mountain of evidence that had been presented by the prosecution. I was the jury foreman, and in the jury room guilt was a foregone conclusion. However, in Virginia, where the trial occurred, the jury also determines the sentence, and that's where we had issues. A couple of jurors wanted a very light sentence, so as not to ruin defendant's life. In the end, the rest of us prevailed upon them to impose prison time, although not as much as most of us would have liked. After delivering the verdict and sentence, I expected that we, the jury, would be released. Instead, the judge asked us to meet with him in the jury room, where he praised us for doing a better job than he had anticipated. We all left not knowing exactly what he had meant. Years later, an attorney friend explained to me what had happened. The defense attorney knew that jurors don't get to see any kind of sentencing report, i.e., a list of the defendant's prior arrests and convictions. So, the defense's whole strategy had occurred during jury selection, where they'd tried to get at least one or two jurors who seemed to have sympathetic views towards criminals, seeing them as victims rather than predators. And it had worked, to an extent. The judge, who knew that the defendant had a record a mile long, expected us to give. Story 15. Parents spend entire day fighting over $40 strawberry picture in divorce. Not a lawyer, but I witnessed my parents spend the whole day fighting about a $40 picture of strawberries. Mom wanted it because she bought and liked it. Dad wanted it because she wasn't getting another darn thing out of the house. The lawyers both made bank that day. I offered to buy my dad the same picture to let it go, but it had to be that one on principle. Divorce brings out the crazy. Story 16. Bodybuilding couple battles over redistribution of supplement stacks. Was a divorce lawyer for a couple who were both into bodybuilding. They fought for a long time about the redistribution of their supplement stacks. There was a mountain of stuff there too. At least 12 different kinds of protein powders, all sorts of amino acids, pills galore. Hope they're still making gains in their new lives. Story 17. Estranged couple goes to court over allegedly stolen frozen dog sperm. Dog sperm. The wife was a breeder and left some frozen sperm in a freezer in one of their sheds. He said there was a power failure, which destroyed the sperm, and he ditched it. She said he stole it. They had agreed everything else: house, investment property, dog breeding business, hers, and cars, etc. But this brought them before the courts. The federal magistrate was not happy. Story 18. Lawyer files injunction against elderly woman dancing naked with plastic penises. Filed for an injunction against an 80-year-old lady who kept dancing naked in her window in full view of her neighbors. Ended up in front of a stern, non-nonsense judge. The highlight of the hearing was when I said, in addition to dancing naked, she has also hung several plastic penises, or is it peenie, with significant girth, I might add. The judge screamed, "I've heard enough," and stormed off the bench. The stenographer was using a steno mask, which looks like an oxygen mask. She was laughing so hard and pressing the mask against her face with such force she was turning bright red. Story 19. Forgery defendant forges doctor's note to avoid court appearance. I had a guy charged with forgery. Original plea rec was for him to serve 3 years with 12 on probation. I get the serve time down to 90 days, in a county that has a policy that for every day you spend in jail, you get credit for 2. So, the guy would only have to spend 45 days in jail, total. Day before we go to plea, my client calls me and says that his gallbladder or some stuff had erupted, and he's going to need emergency surgery. I tell him to send me a doctor's note as soon as possible. He does. It had a doctor's office letterhead, a signature I couldn't read, so it had to be a real doctor, right? Wrong. This fool forged a doctor's note to get out of court for his forgery case. Needless to say, he no longer was going to only have to serve 45 days. That killed me. I had worked so hard to get that plea deal. That also taught me to never trust a client again. Well, trust, but verify. Story 20. Lawyer insures cigars, smokes them, claims loss by fire, gets arrested for arson. Not a lawyer, but I've heard a story about a lawyer trying to win a competition. He decided to insure 24 Cuban cigars, smoke them, said he lost them in a series of small fires, and then make a claim against the insurance company. After the judge stated that the company didn't specify what counted as a fire, the company decided to avoid going through hefty lawful fees and gave the lawyer a settlement of £16,000. As the lawyer cashed his check, they had him arrested for 24 accounts of arson. Story 21. Defendant argues stolen scratch-off tickets were worthless because they were losers. Former assistant state attorney/prosecutor here. This defendant is called up for arraignment, and the judge is telling him that he's been charged with theft for stealing a roll of scratch-off tickets from a gas station. The judge informs the defendant that since the value of the tickets was over $300, therefore it's a felony rather than a misdemeanor. The defendant says to the judge, "But Your Honor, to be fair, the tickets were all losers," implying it's not theft at all. I was amazed at the ingeniousness, yet futility of the argument. Story 22. Opposing counsel challenges authenticity of their own exhibit in trial. Ha! I'm a lawyer. I should win right there. Anyway, we were in trial, and opposing counsel was objecting to a document I was trying to enter into evidence through one of their witnesses. The witness had identified it as one of their business records, but opposing counsel objects. Jury is in the courtroom, so the judge has us approach. We do, and opposing counsel argues the authenticity of the document. I was a little surprised, so my response was, "Your Honor, this is their exhibit. Is counsel stating they submitted inauthentic documents to this court?" Judge turns to counsel. "Are you submitting non-authentic documents?" Opposing counsel stammers out a no, and the document goes in. I was a little surprised they wanted to argue their own document wasn't authentic just to keep me from getting it to the jury. Story 23. Prosecutor claims police report alone establishes probable cause. I am a lawyer. The state tried to argue that probable cause exists simply because there is a police report alleging the crime. From the fact that a police officer filed this report, it is a reasonable inference that the crime took place as described. Good. Allegations are self-proving now. Well, wrap up court then. I guess no need to hear any more motions to dismiss ever. I wonder why no other prosecutor in 240 years of jurisprudence ever thought of that before. 25-year-old assistant district attorney who went to the worst law school in this state. Story 24. Bus driver blames migraine for running red light in traffic court. Made a left turn on a green turn arrow. A city bus ran a red and T-boned me. My car was a little Volkswagen Rabbit, so it just scooted me, and I was perfectly fine. Driver pulls over, comes out and says, "The sun was in my eyes." I say, "I'm not hurt. Thanks for asking." Police arrive, and guess what? There was a literal busload full of witnesses. Everyone had the same story. She ran a red. City paid for my car, etc. She denied wrongdoing and went to court, which I had to attend, along with a witness or two and the officer. Her defense? She had a migraine. Judge: so I should let you off the hook because you had a bad headache and was driving into the sun? Driver: yes, Your Honor. I'm glad you understand. She got her commercial vehicle license revoked. Should have just taken the points. Story 25. Speeding ticket defendant argues Prius ownership proves responsibility. Traffic court. Speeding ticket. Your Honor, I didn't speed, and I can prove it with logic. Judge: okay, lady. I drive a Prius. Judge: lady. That proves I'm responsible. Specifically in the realm of cars. So I obviously wouldn't speed. She had to pay the ticket. Story 26. Woman attempts to sue herself for slipping on own icy driveway. I have a brief encounter, personal injury prospect. Old lady slipped and fell on an icy driveway, which was not salted or maintained, so she wanted to sue for damages. After hearing the story, turns out the lady fell on her own driveway, which she did not salt/maintain. She was wanting to sue herself. Story 27. Divorced couple mediates over euthanizing dying dog for hours. A divorced couple went to mediation to decide if it was appropriate to euthanize a 12-year-old Yorkie that was dying. It took 3 hours and nothing was decided. We discussed things like dignity of death, expected quality of life, and loss of consortium and companionship. We did not come to a decision, and the dog died 2 days later. Story 28. Hit and run suspect parks car at scene and proceeds to party. Hit and run. Dude parked his car at the scene and went ahead to the party he was headed to. When the cops tracked him down, he said that he figured they would find him anyway, so why wait? He was convicted. Story 29. Burglar drops wallet with ID at crime scene, rejects plea deal. I wasn't the lawyer on this case, but I was interning for him and went to the trial. The client pleaded not guilty to the charge of burglary, despite my boss's advice. How was he caught? After stealing all of $90 from the house, he ran out, but dropped his wallet, with his ID and social security card inside. Jury did not believe his "it wasn't me" defense. Got 40 years because of priors. Prosecutor offered him 10. Listen to your attorney's advice, criminals. Story 30. Plaintiff's fake injuries with neck braces years after minor accident. Not a lawyer, I was sued for backing into a car in a parking lot going about 4 miles an hour. Here's where it gets good. I was sued 4 years after it happened, and when they came to court, there were 4 of them, despite being only 2 people in the car at the time of the accident. 3 out of 4 were wearing neck braces. The doctor they had seen, and that testifying on their behalf, was previously sued and had lost his license to practice medicine in the past. Their attorney put me on the stand and attacked me viciously, but she was wildly inaccurate, and I didn't have anything to hide. The jury was so disgusted by the end of the trial that they awarded no damages and made them pay their own legal bills, which I'm sure were extensive, because it ain't cheap getting a doctor who will lie for you. Story 31. Judge plays Marvin Gaye during jury breaks to prevent overhearing. Judge has a button at his desk to push, and the entire court speaker system gives off white noise. I've seen them in a bunch of federal and state courts near me. This seems like something that would happen in a court case in Brooklyn Nine-Nine. I like to believe he looked like Richard Mall from Night Court. When I was on a jury one time, whenever this happened, they just took us out into a separate room. I would have preferred the Marvin Gaye thing. A naked man, taking off with a city bus getting charged for Grand Theft Auto. As Grand Theft Auto requires some element of intent to profit, this was transparently ridiculous and got taken off the charge. Story 32. Victim identifies robbers who raise hands in court. I read this comment a few weeks ago, where someone was robbed by two guys. The judge asks the victim if those two guys are in the courtroom. Before he could answer, those morons lifted their hands, as in, here we are. Story 33. Garbage truck driver mounts no parking sign on new car after accident. Years ago, I worked for a garbage company. It was on a rainy Saturday, and I was going to the dump. Up ahead, I see all kinds of police cars and road flares. Turns out, one of my buddies working for the company was also going to the dump, and lost his brakes going down a hill. He hit the intersection just as the light turned red against him, so he entered the intersection with his garbage truck going about 50 miles per hour. He plowed through 8 cars before coming to rest, on top of a relatively brand new Toyota. Fortunately, the guy driving the Toyota wasn't even scratched. Funny postscript to this story. Bobby stayed in touch with the guy in the Toyota for a while after that. One day, months afterward, he gets a picture in the mail of the guy with his brand new Toyota. He had a real no parking sign mounted to the hood. Story 34. Prosecutor strangles shoe to demonstrate harm time. I once watched a notoriously unhinged prosecutor get on the floor in front of the jury box and pantomime the death throes and spasms of a homicide victim before an outraged judge shut it down sua sponte, excused the jury, and scolded him harshly. Have any crazy stories like that to assist me in avoiding doing my work? Here's a link to that Texas bed stabbing reenactment video. I saw the same thing. I second chaired an open homicide charge as a new lawyer. The defendant was accused of strangling his girlfriend to death, and the prosecutor in closing, after setting up through expert testimony how long it takes to strangle someone, and after building to his big crescendo, whips out a big digital clock, whips off his shoe, flings it to the ground in rage, and then all wrestling style leaps on it, all right there in front of the jury, the judge, God, and everyone in the packed courtroom, and proceeded to strangle the heck out of his shoe for 3 minutes or whatever ridiculous amount of time his expert said it takes. The entire courtroom sat in silence as he struggled, wrestling around to death with his left loafer until the big clock struck 0. Story 35. Doctor testifies in full operating room garb, including cap and booties. I had an otolaryngologist show up to testify at trial wearing full operating room garb, including the cap and booties. I've seen both judges and jurors fall asleep during testimony. I had a fire alarm go off in the middle of my closing. I had a juror report that she could no longer be unbiased because the defendant almost ran her over in the parking lot during lunch. Story 36. Attorney strips jacket encouraged by colleague during hot court session. First, solo hearing. Air conditioning broken in courthouse. It's October in the South, and still really hot. Judge takes the bench and announces that it's too hot to wear his robe, so he takes it off. He's more casual than anticipated, but still in a polo and jeans. As he's disrobing, the female attorney sitting next to me in the gallery pulls out $1 and says, "Keep going, Judge, keep going." Story 37. Woman sets up Buddhist shrine in courtroom for divorce trial. Before the judge comes out, I hear thumps like something being poured on the table. This gets my attention, And I start watching her. I see her set down a silk cloth. I see her reaching and finding polished stones that she starts arranging on the cloth. About then I notice the tissue box, with phrases written in a foreign language sitting in front of her, and realize it isn't the standard court-issued tissue box. I notice the unlit candle sitting next to it. As the judge comes out, I'm Googling the phrases to see that this woman has effectively set up a Buddha shrine in the courtroom for her divorce trial. Story 38. Judge wears Crocs every Wednesday without explanation. A perfectly serious judge who is respected for his rulings always wears Crocs on Wednesday. No one knows why. Story 39. Defense lawyer argues consent in statutory sexual assault case during jury selection. Was in jury selection once. Man accused of statutory sexual assault of his girlfriend's tween daughter. Not 20 minutes after the judge gave prospective jurors a reading of the definition of the crime, the guy's lawyer is asking me whether I would consider consent in this case. When I gave a flat no, she then followed up with the stupidest question, why? I basically reiterated the judge's instructions and followed with, quote, consent has nothing to do with it. If it happened, he's guilty. 2 minutes later, I am leaving the room on one of her peremptory challenges. Because I had used that critical if, she could not even try for a dismissal for cause. Story 40. Defendant steals wrong dog from shelter in passionate defense. Lawer, who is not practicing in court, but when I was in college doing my bachelor's degree, criminal law was part of the curriculum, and this included spending a couple of days observing criminal trials. The things you witness. Anyway, at the start of one of these trials, a guy with the greasiest mullet enters the room. Thin, tall, disproportionately sized limbs, tattoos all over. I swear, the way he sat before the judge, the only thing that was missing was a beer in his hand and a chicken under his arm. Now, this guy chose not to have a lawyer represent him, as he's a regular and spends short periods of time in jail or doing community service pretty much every month. Anyway, real problem case, drugs, alcoholism, etc. But still, he comes across as a really sympathetic dude and has a really entertaining way of telling a story while keeping a straight face and not realizing how funny he is. Anyway, so this guy continues with his story and tells about how he took the dog to his car and went home never feeling happier in his life, and ends his account with the driest delivery of, needless to say, I was very surprised when I woke up the next day and there was a German Shepherd in my room instead of a Staffordshire Terrier. Everyone just broke out in laughter. He didn't get what was funny. Turns out the dude stole the wrong dog. Judge sentenced him to 50 hours of community service and 3,000 or so repairs for the broken doors and camera equipment. Too long. Didn't read guy tries to win sympathies of judge with passionate account of how he broke into a dog shelter and steal his dog back from animal services. Steals the wrong dog. This video does not promote illegal activity. Stories are shared for commentary and education.